clumsy, just like his deadbeat father. That's what my mother said. Not screamed, not muttered under her breath. Said, flat and unhurried, like she was commenting on the weather, while hot coffee soaked through my 10-year-old son's shirt and his mouth opened in a shape no child should have to make at a dinner table. Beckett didn't scream either. He just sat there, eyes wide, both hands pressed flat against his chest like he was trying to hold himself together. The coffee had gone straight down the front of his shirt, pooling in his lap, and I could already see the skin underneath turning red through the wet cotton. Nobody moved. Travis sat across the table with his fork halfway to his mouth, frozen like a man watching something on television he didn't want to get involved with. Lindsay looked at her plate. Dad stayed in his chair at the head of the table, jaw set, eyes on the wall behind me. He didn't speak. He didn't blink. His silence wasn't neutral. It was permission. And Mom set the mug down gently on the table like she'd just finished a sip, and reached for a dinner roll. I stood up. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't look at her. We're leaving. I took Beckett's hand and walked him to the bathroom. I closed the bathroom door behind us. The lock clicked. Beckett stood in front of me shaking, not from cold, but from that kind of trembling a child does when something happens that they know is wrong, but they can't explain why it happened to them. His shirt was soaked brown from the collar to the waist. I lifted it carefully. The skin underneath was blotched red, contact marks spreading across his chest and the soft part of his stomach, the kind that come from liquid hot enough to sting, but not hot enough to send you to the emergency room. Close enough that it mattered, close enough that I felt something shift behind my ribs. I didn't cry, not in front of him. I kept my voice steady. Hold still, sweetheart. I pulled my phone from my back pocket. I took 3 photographs. The shirt, wet and stained, held at arm's length. His chest, the red marks clear against his skin. The 3rd photo captured the timestamp in the corner, 6:23 p.m. on a Sunday evening in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Then I dampened a washcloth and pressed it gently against his chest. He winced once, then held still. Does it hurt? He nodded. We're going home. I carried the shirt in a plastic bag. I didn't go back into the dining room. I didn't say goodbye. I buckled Beckett into the back seat, started the car, and pulled out of my parents' driveway without looking back. The drive was 14 minutes. Neither of us spoke. That was the Sunday dinner that ended 7 years of silence and $159,600 in transfers I will never see again. I need to explain how we got there. I started Copper Kettle Roasters when I was 27 years old. Beckett was 1. I had just signed the divorce papers with his father, Owen Bailey, a man who chose to leave and then chose to stay gone. No custody fight, no co-parenting arrangement, no alimony, just absence, clean and total, like someone closing a tab and walking out of a restaurant. I set up a folding table at the Chattanooga Farmers Market with a hand-lettered sign and 3 varieties of single-origin roast I'd sourced, roasted, and bagged myself in a rented kitchen space that cost me $400 a month. Beckett sat in a portable playpen behind the table. When it rained, I draped a tarp over the booth and kept selling. When it was 92 degrees and the asphalt radiated heat like an oven floor, I kept selling. Some Saturdays I made $60. Some Saturdays I made $300. I kept a notebook with every transaction written in pencil. I still have that notebook. 2 years in, the business was not yet profitable. I was 29. And that was the year my father, Ray Pratt, announced he could no longer work. Back problems, he said. He was 58. He'd held a steady job for 30 years, and then one morning, he decided he was done. My mother, Donna, had never worked full-time. Their rent was $1,400 a month. Their savings, according to my mother's version of the story, were gone. And when Ray called me, he didn't ask. He described a situation and waited for me to volunteer. So I did. I set up a standing monthly transfer of $1,900, $1,900 every single month, sent on the first like clockwork, enough to cover their rent and leave a few hundred for utilities and groceries. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself they were my parents and this was what family did. I told myself that when things stabilized, when Dad found part-time work, when the roastery turned a corner, the payments would taper off naturally. They never tapered, not once in 7 years. 84 consecutive transfers, $1,900 times 84. That's $159,600. I did the math once, sitting at the kitchen table at 1 in the morning while Beckett slept down the hall. I wrote the number on a receipt from the roastery and stared at it until my coffee went cold. Then I folded the receipt, put it in a drawer, and went to bed. During those 7 years, I never told my parents how the business was doing. Not because I was secretive by nature, though I am private, because they never asked, not once. Not when I signed my first wholesale contract 4 years ago with Margaret Turner's restaurant, Turner's Table, the deal that changed everything. Not when I built the client list from 1 restaurant to 10 to 20 to 35. Not when the annual wholesale revenue reached $374,000. Not when my personal income hit $108,000. They never asked because they had already decided what I was. I was the one who sent the money. That was my role. That was the shape they had carved for me in the family, and anything that didn't fit that shape was invisible. My brother Travis, on the other hand, was visible. Travis was the future. Travis was the investment. He was 4 years younger than me, 32 now, and in those 7 years while I was building Copper Kettle from a folding table to a warehouse operation, Travis had held 4 different jobs. None lasted longer than 18 months. He described himself as a digital asset investor, which meant he traded cryptocurrency with money he didn't have and talked about blockchain at Thanksgiving like he was delivering a keynote address. But Travis was the one who got $34,000 in family-funded tuition for a business degree he completed exactly 3 courses of before dropping out. Travis was the one who received 2 used cars paid for by Ray and Donna during the same years my $1,900 monthly transfer was covering their rent. Travis was the one who got a $12,000 investment loan from Dad that was mentioned once at a family dinner and never brought up again. I knew about all of it. I said nothing. I swallowed it the way I swallowed everything in that family. The way I'd been swallowing things since I was 14 years old, and my mother told me at the kitchen table that Travis needed more attention because he was sensitive, and I was strong. Strong. That was the word they used. Not capable, not reliable, not generous, strong, which meant she can take it. And for 7 years, I took it. If you've ever poured everything into people who treated you like you owed them more, hit that like button and subscribe. Sunday dinners were part of the arrangement, not written into any contract, but understood. If I was going to send the money, I was expected to show up. Bring Beckett, sit at the table, eat the food. Listen to Travis talk about his latest opportunity. Watch Lindsay, his wife, smile her careful smile and tell the table how proud she was of Travis for really finding his calling this time. Nod when my mother said things like, Travis has always had such a good head for business. Say nothing when my father looked through me like I was a window with nothing on the other side. Beckett came with me every time. He was good at it, quiet, polite. He said please and thank you and sat up straight. He was 10 years old and he already knew how to read a room better than most adults. He could tell when the air at that table shifted, when his grandmother's voice took on that flat, particular edge, when his grandfather's silence deepened into something that felt like a wall. Travis and Lindsay had 2 kids, Cole, 7, and a daughter, Bryn, 5. At Sunday dinners, Cole and Bryn sat at the main table. Beckett was told every single time to sit at the smaller table near the kitchen. Lindsay called him that sweet boy, with a smile that never quite reached her eyes, and my mother treated him like a guest in someone else's house instead of her own grandson. I told myself it was just my imagination. I told myself kids don't notice those things. I told myself it would get better as he got older, but Beckett noticed. He always noticed. And then came the Sunday that ended everything. The table was set, ham, green beans, mashed potatoes, rolls, a gravy boat in the center, and my mother's coffee mug at her right hand, the same ceramic mug she'd used for 15 years, filled to the top. Beckett was sitting next to her. He'd been placed there because the smaller table had been folded up that week. Some excuse about needing the space, so for the first time in months, he was at the main table. He reached across for a roll. His elbow caught the edge of the serving dish. It shifted maybe 2 inches. Nothing spilled. Nothing broke. A 10-year-old boy reached for bread and bumped a dish. My mother picked up her mug. Full. She lifted it over Beckett's head and poured. Slowly. Deliberately. The coffee went straight down, hit his collar, and spread across the front of his shirt in a dark, widening stain. It was hot enough that he gasped. Hot enough that he jerked backward in his chair, hands flying to his chest. Hot enough that when I pulled his shirt up in the bathroom 3 minutes later, the skin was red and blotched from his collarbone to his stomach. And while the coffee was still soaking through the cotton, while Beckett was still trying to understand what had just happened, my mother set the mug down on the table and said it. Clumsy, just like his deadbeat father. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't laugh. She said it like she was reading a label on a jar. Travis looked at his plate. Lindsay looked at her plate. Ray sat at the head of the table with his hands folded in his lap, staring past all of us at the wall, and said nothing. Not a word, not a flinch, not even a clearing of the throat. And that was the moment something inside me snapped. Not loud, not dramatic, just a clean, quiet break, like a bone that had been carrying too much weight for too long and finally gave way, in silence. I took my son to the bathroom. I photographed the shirt. I photographed the marks. I drove home without speaking. Beckett sat in the back seat the entire ride with his arms wrapped around himself. When we pulled into the driveway, he looked up at me in the rearview mirror and said, in a voice so small it cracked right down the middle, "What did I ever do to them?" I didn't answer right away. I parked the car. I turned off the engine. I sat in the dark for a moment, listening to the tick of the cooling motor and the sound of my own breathing. "Nothing," I said. "You didn't do anything." He nodded. He didn't cry. He just nodded, like a boy who had finally stopped hoping the answer would be different. I carried him inside. I put him in a clean shirt. I made him toast with butter and sat with him until he fell asleep on the couch with his head against my arm. Then I went to the kitchen. I sat down at the table. The house was dark except for the light above the stove. I looked at my phone. I looked at the photographs I'd taken. The coffee-stained shirt, the red marks on my son's chest. The timestamp. 6:23 p.m. I felt nothing. Not anger, not pity, nothing. The quiet wasn't heavy anymore. It was sharp. It was clear. I picked up the phone and called Carol Stewart at 9:47 p.m. She answered on the second ring. I told Carol everything. The dinner, the coffee, Beckett's chest, the photographs. I spoke for 11 minutes without stopping, and Carol listened without interrupting, which is what a good attorney does when she can hear the foundation shifting under a client's voice. When I finished, she asked one question. "Have you pulled your business credit report recently?" I hadn't. I hadn't had a reason to. Copper Kettle's accounts were clean. I paid vendors on time. I carried no revolving debt on the business. My bookkeeping was meticulous because that's who I am, not because I expected anyone to steal from me. "Pull it," Carol said. "Tonight if you can. Tomorrow morning at the latest. I want to see what's attached to your EIN. I didn't ask why. Something in her voice told me not to. I hung up. I opened my laptop at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd once written $159,600 on a receipt, and stared at it until my coffee went cold. The screen lit up the dark room. I logged into the business credit monitoring service I'd set up 3 years earlier when I signed my 10th wholesale contract. I'd checked it maybe twice in all that time. There had never been a reason to look twice. The report loaded. I scrolled past the trade lines I recognized. Vendor accounts, equipment lease, the small revolving line I kept for seasonal inventory, all familiar, all mine. And then I saw it. A commercial credit line, opened 14 months earlier, $92,000, listed under Copper Kettle Roasters EIN, authorized signatory Colleen A. Pratt. I had not opened that credit line. I had not authorized it. I had never seen the lending institution's name before in my life. I read the amount twice. I read the authorization line 3 times. My hands were steady. My breathing was even. I felt the same nothing I'd felt an hour earlier looking at the photographs of Beckett's chest, except now the nothing had edges. Now the nothing had a shape. I called Carol back. "I found it," I said. $92,000. There was a pause. Then Carol said, "Don't touch anything. Don't log out. Don't call anyone. I'll be at your kitchen table in 3 days." She was there on Wednesday morning at 6:48. Carol sat across from me with the laptop between us and a legal pad to her left. She pulled the full report. She pulled the application documents from the lender's portal using a records request she drafted on her phone in the car on the way over. By 8:30 a.m., when we were looking at the forged authorization, it was Travis's handwriting. Not a perfect forgery, not even a particularly good one. He had signed my name in a loose approximation of my signature on a document authorizing the use of Copper Kettle Roasters EIN for a commercial credit application. The EIN itself, he'd gotten a copy of during a visit to the roastery 2 years earlier. I remembered the visit. He'd asked to see how the operation worked. I'd been proud enough to show him. He'd stood in my office for 20 minutes, asking questions about the business filings on my desk, and I thought he was finally taking an interest. He wasn't taking an interest. He was taking a photograph of my EIN letter. The credit line had been drawn in 3 installments over 4 months, transferred into a joint account held by Travis and Lindsay. The funds were gone. Forensic accounting would later confirm that $89,400 of the $92,000 went into a cryptocurrency exchange that collapsed within 6 months. The remaining $2,600 was unaccounted for. Probably spent. Probably nothing. Carol set her pen down and looked at me. "This is federal," she said. "Forging a business authorization to obtain credit under someone else's EIN is fraud under 18 U.S.C. Section 1014. This isn't a family argument, Colleen. This is a federal crime." I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I said, "What do I do?" "You file a criminal complaint with the SBA Office of Inspector General. I can walk you through the referral. They'll assign an investigator. And you do not contact Travis, Lindsay, your parents, or anyone else in that family until I tell you it's safe to." I nodded. "One more thing," I said. "I need to cancel a bank transfer." That was the morning. 1 week after the Sunday dinner. 7 days of silence. 7 days of no phone calls to my parents, no texts to Travis, no pretending. 7 days during which my phone sat on the counter and did not ring because none of them had called to check on Beckett. Not one. Not a single message asking if he was okay, if the marks had faded, if he'd slept that night. 7 days, and the only person who had asked about my son was Carol Stewart, a woman I paid by the hour. At 7:14 a.m., I opened the banking app on my phone. I navigated to the recurring transfers. There it was, the same entry that had appeared on the first of every month for 84 consecutive months. $1,900 to Ray and Donna Pratt. Automatic, reliable, invisible. My thumb moved slowly across the screen. I tapped the transfer. I tapped edit. I tapped cancel. The confirmation prompt appeared. "Are you sure you want to cancel this recurring transfer?" I tapped yes. The screen refreshed. The line item disappeared. 7 years, and it took one tap to end it. The soft click of confirmation was the only sound in the kitchen. Beckett was still asleep down the hall. I didn't feel relief. Not yet. I felt clarity, the kind that comes when you stop holding something heavy and realize your arms have been shaking for years. Then I called Carol. She called the SBA Office of Inspector General. The complaint was filed that morning. Agent Dennis Ward was assigned within the week. I did not call Ray. I did not call Donna. I did not call Travis. I did not send a message or a letter or an explanation. I let the silence do the work. The silence lasted 3 days. On the 4th day, my phone rang. Travis. I let it ring 4 times, 5, 6. It went to voicemail. I didn't listen to it. 12 minutes later, it rang again. Travis. I declined the call. Then a text from Lindsay. "Hey, can you call us when you get a chance? Something came up with your parents' account." I didn't respond. I turned off the ringer. By evening, there were 9 missed calls. 3 from Travis, 2 from Lindsay, 4 from my mother's phone. No voicemail from any of them except Travis's first attempt, which I still hadn't played. I deleted it without listening. On day 5, my mother called from a number I didn't recognize. I answered, thinking it might be a vendor. Her voice came through flat and controlled, the same voice she used when she said the word clumsy over my son's scalded chest. "Colleen Ann." The transfer didn't come through. I stayed quiet, letting her continue. "Your father checked the account this morning. It's not there. I need you to fix whatever happened with the bank." I kept my voice steady. "There's nothing to fix." I canceled it. 3 seconds of silence. "You what?" "I canceled the transfer. It's not coming back." "You can't just, we depend on that. You know we depend on that. Your father can't work." "Colleen, this isn't a game." I didn't respond. I just listened. "Are you listening to me? Colleen Ann Pratt, are you?" "I'm listening," I said. "I'm just done paying." She started to say something else. I pressed end. I set the phone face down on the counter. I went to check on Beckett, who was doing homework at the kitchen table with his headphones on, and I stood in the doorway for a moment watching him write in his notebook, his pencil moving in small, careful strokes, and I thought about how he had never once in his 10 years asked me for $159,600 worth of anything, and I had given it freely to people who poured coffee on him. The weeks that followed were methodical. Carol handled the legal architecture. Agent Dennis Ward worked the investigation through her office, never contacting me directly. Within 6 weeks, he confirmed the forged authorization documents. The signature comparison wasn't even close. Travis hadn't bothered to practice. He had assumed I would never look. Then came week 8. Travis called. This time I answered because Carol had told me to. She was sitting across from me in my living room with her phone recording and a legal pad on her knee. "You went to the SBA?" His voice was thin, cracked at the edges. "On your own family?" I filed an accurate report. "You're going to destroy us." "I didn't open that credit line, Travis." Silence. Then, "Colleen, listen to me. Lindsay's name is on that application. Do you understand what you've done? They're going to... This is going to ruin everything." "Lindsay signed the application," I said. "That's not something I did." "We can fix this. I'll pay it back. I'll figure something out. Just call them off. Call whoever you need to call and make this stop." "I'm not calling anyone, Travis." He hung up. I set the phone down. Carol looked at me. Neither of us spoke for a moment. "He's going to escalate," she said. "I know." 2 days later, the Facebook smear campaign launched. 2 local business groups, posts from accounts I didn't recognize, claiming Copper Kettle Roasters had failed health inspections, that the warehouse had been cited for contamination, that a former employee had reported unsafe conditions. None of it was true. None of it had ever been true. Copper Kettle had a spotless inspection record going back 4 years. The same week, my phone buzzed at 11:47 p.m. A voicemail from Ray. I listened to it once, alone, standing at the kitchen counter in the dark. He said, "You think you can just cut us off and walk away? We'll make sure you lose everything you built. Every restaurant in this city will know who you really are." His voice was steady, not shouting, measured, deliberate, like a man who had rehearsed the threat in his head before picking up the phone. This was Ray Pratt, the man who had sat silent at the head of the table while his wife poured coffee on his grandson, now finding his voice for the first time in 7 years. Not to apologize, not to ask about Beckett, to threaten the only person who had kept his lights on since he was 58. I forwarded the voicemail to Carol's email. She saved the file. She would later attach it to the cease and desist letter her office sent to both Ray and Travis. Him back. I did not call him back that night, or the next morning, or the morning after that. I did not call him back again. I went through my contacts. I blocked Travis's number. I blocked Lindsay's number. I blocked my mother's number. I blocked my father's number, and the unrecognized number she had called from 5 days earlier. I removed myself from the family group chat I had been muted in for 3 years anyway. I deleted the text thread with Lindsay without reading the last 4 messages. I went into my phone settings and turned off notifications from every account connected to anyone named Pratt except my own. I didn't do it in anger. I did it in clarity, then I turned off the kitchen light. I walked down the hall. I checked on Beckett, who was asleep with one arm hanging off the bed and his mouth slightly open, the way 10-year-old boys sleep when they feel safe enough to stop holding themselves together. I pulled his door closed gently. The latch clicked. Soft, quiet, final. The house was still. The streetlight cut through the blinds in thin white lines across the hallway floor. I stood there for a moment, breathing. For the first time in 7 years, I could hear myself think. The next morning, Beckett woke up before me. I found him in the kitchen, standing on his tiptoes at the counter, trying to reach the bread for toast. He'd pulled a plate down from the lower cabinet and set it on the counter, with a napkin folded beside it. Not folded well. Folded the way a 10-year-old folds things, with one corner tucked under and the rest bunched. But he'd done it himself, and when he heard me in the doorway, he turned around and said, "I'm making breakfast." I didn't correct him. I didn't take over. I said, "Can you make me one too?" He nodded, serious, like he'd been promoted. We ate toast with butter at the kitchen table. The house was quiet. Not the heavy quiet of the weeks before, the kind that pressed against your chest while you waited for someone to call and ruin the stillness. This was different. This was the quiet of a house where no one owed anyone an explanation. Beckett chewed his toast and looked at me. "Are we going to Grandma's on Sunday?" "No." He thought about it for a second. Then he said, "Okay," and took another bite. That was it. No follow-up questions, no tears. Just, okay. Like a boy who had already been carrying the weight of those Sunday dinners in his body and was relieved someone had finally set it down. The weeks that followed were not dramatic. They were administrative. Carol handled the legal work with the precision I'd come to expect from her, filing motions, managing communications with Agent Ward's office, and keeping me informed without overwhelming me. I handled the business, I roasted coffee, I filled wholesale orders. I kept my 35 restaurant accounts running on schedule. I returned emails from vendors and invoiced on time and swept the warehouse floor myself at the end of the day because the rhythm of it steadied my hands. Margaret Turner called me the morning after the smear posts went up on Facebook. I hadn't even seen them yet. She had. "Don't respond to any of it," Margaret said. "I've got something better than a response." Within 24 hours, Margaret posted on both of the same business groups. She uploaded Copper Kettle's complete inspection history, clean and unbroken, going back 4 years. She posted a photograph of Turner's table menu from the year we first partnered, with Copper Kettle's name printed at the bottom under a line that read, "Proudly serving locally roasted coffee." She wrote 3 sentences. "I have served Copper Kettle coffee in my restaurant for 4 years. Their inspection records are public. I'll let the documents speak." That post reached 4,200 shares in 48 hours. 3 restaurant clients who had suspended orders after seeing the smear campaign restored them within the week. Not because I asked, because Margaret's post made the truth louder than the lie. The smear campaign died quietly after that. The anonymous accounts that had posted the false claims went silent. And no retractions, no apologies, just silence, the kind that settles over a fire that ran out of fuel. 4 months after the Sunday dinner, federal charges were filed against Travis, credit application fraud under 18 U.S.C. Section 1014. The forged EIN authorization document was the centerpiece. The signature comparison wasn't close. Agent Ward's investigation had been thorough, methodical, and entirely indifferent to the fact that the accused was my brother. Lindsay was named as co-conspirator on the original application and subpoenaed as a witness against her own husband. I heard about the subpoena from Carol. I didn't react out loud. I sat in my office at the roastery with the phone against my ear and looked out the window at the loading dock where a driver was picking up 14 cases of house blend for a new restaurant in East Ridge. And I thought about Lindsay sitting across from a federal attorney being asked to explain why her name appeared on a fraudulent credit application alongside a forged signature, and I felt nothing, not satisfaction, not pity, nothing. Travis's attorney contacted Carol attempting to negotiate. Carol forwarded the inquiry to Agent Ward without comment. There was nothing to negotiate. The documents existed. The signatures were forged. The money was gone. 5 months after the dinner, the $92,000 credit line was formally vacated from Copper Kettle's liability. Carol called me at 3:22 p.m. on a Tuesday to confirm it. The lender had reviewed the fraud determination, accepted the OIG findings, and removed the debt from my business record. Copper Kettle's credit report was clean again. The $92,000 was now Travis's problem, owed in full to the lending institution, with a civil restitution order attached to whatever came next in his case. That same month, Ray and Donna received a 60-day eviction notice from their landlord. Without the $1,900 monthly transfer, they couldn't make rent. They'd been unable to make rent since the first month I canceled the payment, but they'd managed to scrape by for a few months on whatever savings remained, a credit card, and what I later heard was a short-term loan from a neighbor who didn't know the full story. The neighbor stopped lending in month 3. I learned about the eviction through a mutual acquaintance, not because I asked, because people talk, and when a family that has lived in the same rental for 9 years suddenly has to leave, the neighbors notice. 7 months after the Sunday dinner, Travis entered a pretrial diversion program. Not prison, not yet. The program was contingent on full restitution of $92,000 to the lending institution. He did not have $92,000. He had never had $92,000 that wasn't borrowed, misappropriated, or attached to someone else's name. The civil restitution order was issued. His credit score, according to what Carol heard through legal channels, had dropped to somewhere around 440. Background checks now showed the federal fraud charge. Job applications went unanswered. The last I heard through anyone who would know, Travis was working part-time at a warehouse distribution center on the night shift, making less in a month than I used to send our parents. Lindsay filed for separation the same week. She withdrew the filing 2 weeks later, but the tension didn't leave. It moved into the walls of their house like moisture, invisible and corrosive, and from what filtered back through mutual acquaintances, the house got very quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet. The kind where 2 people sit in the same room and don't speak because every sentence leads back to the same $92,000 neither of them can fix. Their kids, Cole and Bryn, were pulled from their after-school programs. I don't know the specifics. I don't need to. I know that choices have weight, and the weight doesn't always land where it should, and that's not something I caused. That's something Travis built when he picked up a pen and forged my name. Ray and Donna moved to a one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat on Rossville Boulevard. They brought 2 carloads of furniture. The rest went into a storage unit they couldn't afford by month 3. I imagine the storage company sent notices. I imagine the lock was eventually cut. I don't know for certain, because I was not in contact with them, and I had no intention of resuming contact. Ray never apologized for the voicemail. Donna never apologized for the coffee. Neither of them ever asked about Beckett. I learned that last fact from Carol, who had received one final communication from a lawyer Ray consulted about potential claims against me. The consultation apparently lasted 20 minutes. The lawyer declined to take the case. There was no claim. There had never been a claim. A daughter is not legally obligated to subsidize her parents' rent, and stopping a voluntary transfer is not abandonment. Carol told me about it over coffee at her office, and then she said, "That's the last of it." And I believed her. The information stopped coming after that, not because I blocked the channels, though I had blocked the direct ones, because there was simply nothing left to report. The family I had funded for 7 years had contracted into a one-bedroom apartment and a pretrial diversion program and a separation filing that got withdrawn but never resolved. And the silence that followed was not my silence. It was theirs. 1 year after the Sunday dinner, I held a relaunch party at Copper Kettle Roasters. New signage out front. The logo redesigned by a graphic artist in Chattanooga who drank our coffee every morning and offered to do it at cost. The warehouse floor was swept clean, the sample tables lined up along the east wall, the roasting equipment gleaming under new overhead lights I'd installed the week before. 31 of the original 35 restaurant clients came. 4 new ones. Margaret Turner arrived early and brought a sheet cake from her own kitchen, with the Copper Kettle logo drawn in frosting. It wasn't perfect, it was better than perfect. A hand-painted banner hung above the entrance, roasted in Chattanooga since year 1. Beckett stood at the sample table. He wore a white button-down shirt embroidered with the Copper Kettle logo on the left breast pocket, a gift from Margaret Turner's kitchen manager, who had sewn it herself on a machine she kept in her apartment. The shirt fit him perfectly. He'd grown 2 inches since the Sunday dinner, and the collar sat straight against his neck, clean and white, with no stain and no memory of one. He poured sample cups, small ones, the 2-ounce tasting size we use for events. He knew the roast names. He said them correctly, pronouncing the origins the way I'd taught him, pointing to the region cards I'd printed and laminated for the table. A woman in her 60s picked up a cup, took a sip, and looked at him. "Who made this?" Beckett looked at her. "My mom." He wasn't sad when he said it. He wasn't performing. He was just a 10-year-old boy who knew something good about his family and was not afraid to say it out loud. I stood across the room, watching him. Margaret was beside me, holding a paper plate with a slice of her own cake on it. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, "He's good at that." "He is." "You did that." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The room was full of people who bought my coffee and showed up when it mattered and never once asked me to apologize for protecting my son. That was enough. That was more than enough. Later that night, after the last guest had left and I'd swept the floor and locked the warehouse doors, I drove home with Beckett asleep in the back seat. The streetlights passed over the windshield in slow, rhythmic pulses. The car was quiet. The road was clear. I carried him inside. I set him in his bed. I pulled the blanket up to his chin and stood there in the doorway, listening to him breathe. The house was still. Not the old stillness, the kind that came from waiting for the phone to ring, from bracing for the next demand, from holding my breath at a dinner table where my son wasn't safe. This stillness was mine. I had built it. I had paid for it, not with 7 years of transfers to people who never said thank you, but with one decision, made clearly, executed quietly, and never taken back. I walked to the kitchen. I didn't turn on the overhead light. The stove light was enough. I filled the kettle and set it on the burner and waited for the water to heat. The flame was low and steady. The house was dark, except for the blue ring of the gas and the thin white lines. The street light cut across the floor. The kettle clicked. I poured a cup. I sat down at the table where I had once stared at a receipt with $159,600 written on it. I didn't think about that number anymore. I didn't think about Ray's voicemail or Donna's mug or Travis's forged signature or Lindsay's careful smile. I thought about Beckett at the sample table, saying 2 words to a stranger like they were the simplest thing in the world. My mom. The cut was clean, and for the first time in 7 years, I could hear myself think. If you enjoyed this story about protecting your children and knowing your worth, hit that like button and let me know what you think in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell for more stories just like this one. Thanks for watching.